Well, welcome back. Kia ora. I'm David Downs, hosting you this afternoon for Tech Week TV. If you're trying to pretend that you're working and skiving off, I hope that you're doing that successfully. And I hope that you've had some coffee, because we're about to talk about some really cool, interesting, deep tech that will require you to, turn those neurons on. And this is about tech for a better world. I mean, the whole theme of Tech Week is around tech for a better world, and there cannot be another part of the sector that demonstrates that as well as the medtech part of the industry. The whole idea of sort of human health and what technology can do to benefit humans is so inspiring and interesting. And we've got some Kiwi companies that are genuinely world class in this space. So we're going to focus on a couple of them, telling some more stories and meeting some more leaders. New Zealand has been a pioneer in the health tech industry for a long time, actually. If you think way back to things like Fisher & Paykel Healthcare, Alf Melville back in 1960-something, pioneering what's now become sleep apnea devices. We've been in this sort of industry for a long, long time, and we're about to meet some new organisations. So I'm going to introduce our two guests for this section. First of all, many of you might know Dr. Brian Ward from Aroa, and Brian was a veterinary surgeon. I didn't really realise that. Who's now been unleashed into the world of human health. He's the founder and chief executive officer of Aroa Biosurgery. And I think we'll talk more about this, I'm sure, but you discovered the regenerative properties of ovine forestomach, that's sheep, by the way, in 2008, and took Aroa from concept to commercialisation, and now actually globalisation, because you've got, 50 countries, Brian? Amazing. Brian's held senior management positions at Baxter, Beecham and SmithKline Beecham around the world, and was also the founding CEO of NZ Bio, so Biotech NZ, so part of the industry groups that support this incredible sector. So welcome. And then we have Honey Ye from Allometry. And those of you who haven't heard Allometry didn't watch the HealthTech Awards last year, where you swept the field and cleaned up as they came out of nowhere, but been in stealth mode for a while. Honey's been over 20 years of international experience commercialising biotech, pharma and medical devices. She's currently the COO at Allometry and the chair of MedTech and surgical investment committees at Return on Science, which is part of or related to the uni services. She's also a mentor with KiwiNet and Velocity, and is passionate about growing the medtech sector through inclusive and diverse leadership. So we've got an amazing group. I should mention that you've got a BSc in molecular biology, a postgraduate diploma, a master's, just in case any out there is feeling inadequate, this will help, a master's of science with honours in medical science from the University of Auckland, and a postgraduate diploma in business management and leadership from Darden University. She's also an associate member of the Institute of Directors and can walk on water. Welcome to both of you.
Not quite.
And the winner of 3 HealthTech Awards. And I think Brian's probably won some mini awards as well, so we won't get into that. But first of all, thank you for joining us for Tech Week and inspiring and informing this audience about the fact that, and no disrespect, because we just had a fantastic discussion about gaming, but there's more to tech than just software. There's also deep tech. So do you want to, I did a poor job of discussing, your businesses, but maybe Brian, do you want to go first and tell us a little bit more about Aroa?
Yeah, so we're a soft tissue reconstruction company. So we make devices that help regenerate soft tissue in people. So, in 2 sort of areas. So in wounds that are really difficult to heal, so things like diabetic ulcers and venous ulcers, but then also, we also, in acute procedures where you need to replace tissue and be able to regenerate tissue really quickly. So things like trauma, where tumours are resected, we have products that help rebuild that tissue and get that patient back to being healthy again.
In my mind, when I hear about soft tissue regeneration, I think of that TV program Westworld, where they sort of make like skeletons and it's not like that though, is it?
Not really, no. Okay. A little bit, but
a little bit. Well, I've seen some of it. It's not far off. And Honey, what about Allometry?
So just to put it in the software kind of context, we make diagnostic devices that diagnose the software problems of the stomach as opposed to the hardware, which is being detected and create the ability to treat with all the imaging techniques. So all the endoscopies, anything with a scopy at the end is an imaging technique that can see the problems like ulcers and cancers. But we go after diagnosing the dysfunctional diseases. So those are like bloating, pain, acid reflux that are very, very common. So about 1 in 5 humans or general population suffer from these kind of issues.
IBS, that sort of
IBS is more further down. We're currently focusing on the stomach specifically,
Keep it
but
above
IBS. But yes, that's kind of the software. It's more like an ECG for the stomach, to put it very simply.
Wow. Now, just because this is the first time I've seen it, but you brought a demonstration device along. Can you tell us about this? And I'm not sure if we can zoom in, but if we can't, hopefully we can describe it to you.
So sure. So the device is constructed from two specific parts. We have a hardware which is completely designed and manufactured here in New Zealand. Okay. We're a spin out of the University of Auckland, and we were based out of the ABI, the Auckland Bioengineering Institute, before we grew up and got our own office. So this is still being manufactured on the premises there.
Yeah.
And then there's a single-use element, which is this, and each one of these little silver dots is an electrode. So in a EKG or ECG, we have 64 electrodes. That the idea is that once the patient comes in and we take a baseline measurement of how the stomach is working, then we activate the stomach with a milkshake and a muesli bar. And we compare it to a business class flight from here to Melbourne, so the patient sits
I hope you get a bit more than a milkshake and a Milky Bar on your business class flights, but yeah.
Not Karu hour.
Okay, right.
But then there's a few measurements that are taken from the patient's stomach to identify where the stomach is. And then this is more of a peel and stick kind of a jobby. So it's easily peeled off, placed on the patient's stomach, and is completely wireless. And as you can see, very easy to wear. So the patient just sits reclined,
unless you got
wearing this for a few hours. We do shave that off.
Okay, good.
There's ways around it. There's ways around it.
Otherwise, we would have demonstrated it, but we don't have time for the shave.
So after a few hours, then the patient will be good to go, and the report goes to the clinician, and they can do the diagnosis based on the information.
Wow. And without getting too graphic, but it's all the little gurgles and burps and movements of things through the system. You're kind of tracing that to diagnose.
So we then clean the signal, so to speak, to identify which is completely from the stomach and which are the artifacts. So that's currently the signal processing is where the juicy part is, and the engineers at the company get very, very excited. Excuse the pun.
Yeah, So both of you got stomachs as a core part of your issue. You
it
cheap
is true.
Stomachs or full stomachs. Oh my gosh. And so how does one land on this sort of really deep, significant tech? I mean, Brian, you've been working in Aroa, and before that had a different name, but for many, many years with this idea of using this sort of matrix of sheep intestinal stuff.
Yeah, I mean, for us it was really the whole emergence of this field called regenerative medicine, and this sort of idea that that's a complex process. It's really hard to replicate synthetically, and so these tissues, like the tissue that we use as a source for our material, it has it's a framework that cells can migrate through, but also includes this mixture of molecules that are signals to cells, and so the material signals to cells and encourages them to move into this tissue and to lay down new tissue. So it's kind of encoded within that material naturally.
Yeah.
And so I think in that field of regenerative medicine, people realize that actually you can't replicate that synthetically, and the best way to produce these materials is to start with a source, a source that naturally has high levels of that material, and then process it in a way that you remove from it the things that the human body would react against, because it's a different species, so you have to take out the cells and the cell contents, but at the same time retain the high concentration of those molecules, and also that framework that cells recognize and they can crawl through. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. I mean, it's become a whole new way of healing, and a whole new way of kind of work. It's almost like working with the body, working with the body, with what the body knows, to be able to encourage and reprogram, if you like, cells to encourage them to generate new tissue.
Wow.
It's a fascinating field.
It is, but you must have worked that from the very early days of realising some of the attributes of this stomach material.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, my training helped me a little bit with that, so I'd done quite a bit of surgery. I'd seen these materials emerging from other tissue sources, and I thought, well, that's really interesting in that now it looks like you can use animal source. There's plenty of animals in New Zealand. It's a very, we're very isolated from the rest of the world, so we don't have a lot of the diseases that exist in other parts of the world. So it's a great place to source these types of materials. It has a natural fit with being able to develop this type of company in this part of the world.
Yeah. And what about Elementary? Did the beginnings of the product, was it just one of your founders was a bit gassy one day and thought, why is this happening? Or
Not quite. So the science behind the device is over a decade old. So there's a lot of, it's truly deep tech. So Professor Greg O'Grady, who's one of the co-founders and the CEO of the company, he is a colorectal surgeon by training, so he knew these group of patients. He knows this is one of the most common group of patients that the gastroenterologists see, and there's very little today that they can do in terms of diagnosis and being able to give them any answers.
really?
And he was doing what any good surgeon would do. So he would cut the patients open and place these electrodes directly over the stomach.
Yeah.
So that wasn't exactly something that was easily scalable. But then he joined forces with Dr. Armin Garibans, who he's an engineer in his background, and he was able to pick up that signal on the skin surface and be able to identify and clean the signal. So then the two joined forces. And the first version of this device didn't look anything as beautiful and non-invasive as this does now.
Yep.
So it was about a spaghetti of 100 cables being attached and having to identify.
But more like when you do an ECG or something and you've got little cables everywhere.
Yeah, so in fact, I could have brought a photo of that. Luckily, we probably have that prototype. But then it took a lot of work from an industrial designer, Jim Hannon-Tan, who's based in Australia, but worked very closely with us and with the patients to understand the complications that would we wanted to step away from that invasiveness of this testing. And the main objective of the company is to really create easy access to gastric health for the patients. So our motto is that if you have a chair and Wi-Fi, you can have an answer to your gastric problems.
And a milkshake and a muesli bar.
Exactly, rather than a nuclear medicine center or anything like that.
And that's the thing, it looks it's very clean and beautiful. You don't have to put anything up anywhere or into anything. You're all good. It's all on the outside.
Exactly,
Nice.
literally. So this is what it looks like, and the patients wears it. They just need to sit, recline. They can be anywhere in a waiting room, in a nice lazy boy chair,
But it's one thing to come up with an idea or to see a potential for an idea, and it's another thing completely to turn that into a product, and it's another thing again to turn that into a company. And you've all done each of those steps, or you've both done each of those steps. So can you tell us about that translation of kind of pure science into a product? First of all, Brian, you've been on that journey the entire way.
Yeah, so for me, I'd done a little bit of work before I started the company, enough to kind of prove out that the idea worked. But really for us, I think in medtech, the first 4 or 5 years it's a little bit of a mix of a science experiment and trying to build a company. So, you get enough funding to be able to, or enough investment really, to be able to do some of those key things, but you don't really get to sell the product. So for us, in those first few years, it was really around, getting regulatory approvals, getting our first partnership, and finding a way to be able to sell the product commercially. Yeah. And a little bit of clinical evidence along the way as well.
Yeah. And did you have some investors with you on the journey?
Yeah, the first round I raised money from Movac and Sparkbox and NZVIF, and that was, it was about a $1.5 million financing round, which lasted about a year. And so that was at the end of 2007, and then 2008 the GFC came along. So we had a brutal time for about 3 years. And during those first couple of years, we were raising these little micro rounds of about 500K at a time, and be looking down the barrel of closing
just a little bit more runway,
6 months. So we sort of went through that for a long period of time.
Cuts.
Yeah. But you sort of start to get some evidence and build some confidence with people, then it got easier. That's for sure. Yeah.
What about Elementary? This product now is starting to really build, and the company is starting to really build around it.
Absolutely.
Have you partnered with others? Have you got investment in? How have you grown the business?
Yes, absolutely. So as Brian alluded to it, in medtech you're in it for the long run. There's a long gap between when you come up with the idea and the concept, and you have a proof of concept until you're actually selling in the market and making real money out of it. So we had to do a lot of that kind of trial and error as well, and also
Yeah.
capturing evidence and also understanding this technology is quite disruptive in its space as well. So it's understanding, okay, so if you have these results, would anybody pay for this solution? There's different ways of solving it.
Yeah.
But so there was a lot of the grants and the non-dilutive funds, but very quickly, Uni Services was the first investor
Right.
that we had on our board, and then followed by IP Group and Matu, who came in very early on for the seed round. And then in our last round, we were lucky to have Movac leading our last round as
okay.
well. So we have
Oh, you
that
both had
yeah.
Movac in them,
Yeah, yeah.
and that's fantastic. And you're also, looking at this as a global solution, not just a New Zealand solution. Both of you, again, have big aspirations. And Brian, I mentioned earlier, something like 50 countries now that you're exporting to?
We're predominantly in the US, so over 95% of our business is in the US.
Yeah.
And so, that's a big part of what we're focused on. But then, outside of that, we've been, pursuing approvals in other parts of the world. So it's 50 countries that we're approved in. We have distributors now in 15 other countries.
It's a big thing, isn't it, in the medtech space, in your space, to get those approvals. I mean, there's a big hurdle that you need to go through.
It is. I mean, it's sort of people, when they look at this industry, they think it's really hard and, why would you do it? But the good thing about it is once you get them, you've got a long period of time where the company can be successful, and it's hard for everyone else that comes in behind.
You've kind of got a moat then, haven't you?
Yeah, you have this huge moat. So it is hard to get started, but once you get started and you're successful, then what you find is that the world doesn't change around you over 24 months and you go out of business because something else has come along.
Yeah.
You tend to have this very long runway of success. So it's a different type of investment compared to something like software, where things can change dramatically very quickly.
And Honey, have you been successful in getting the registrations and all the regulatory authorities that you need as well?
Well, and like Brian, our biggest focus is in the US. So US market is huge for us. So, and we've been very lucky. We've had 2 FDA approvals actually. So we are selling currently in the United States.
Yeah.
We also have the UKCA. So we are we've got the MHRA approval, so we can sell in the UK, and obviously here in our home market of New Zealand. So those are our 3 main markets at the moment that we're focusing on, and US will be our main and our biggest market for the foreseeable future.
Why is that? I mean, everyone's got stomachs all around the world. Is it that the US medical system has the model of payers is separate from the insurance companies, et cetera, or are they just more open to this type of technology for both of your technologies?
I guess the US healthcare system is a very difficult one to navigate through, and it's not as straightforward by any stretch of the imagination, but they spend the most on healthcare, and it's a very, very big market. And it's a different way of looking at healthcare and the healthcare investment within the US than compared to other, let's say, publicly funded healthcare systems. So by nature, even from my previous life when I was at Fisher & Paykel Healthcare, it tends to be the biggest market on its own.
Yeah. So but again, like what you said earlier, Brian, once you've gone to the effort of getting the approvals and understanding the space, you've got a kind of a runway to operate in.
Yeah, I think the thing about the US is that it's at least 50 to 60% of the world healthcare market. So it's a really large market. It's one regulatory regime. So if you get one approval there, then you're on the market.
Yeah.
It's also validating. I think if you are successful in the US, or even if you get a product registered in the US, that carries a lot of weight in the rest of the world. So if you go to the US first and you succeed in the US,
you get the tick for
then
the
you get the tick and everything comes in behind that. Whereas if you go to some other countries, the opportunity is smaller. It's still a huge amount of effort, and the upside's a lot lower. So I think the US makes a lot of sense in terms of simplicity and scale and validation.
Yeah, but there's a lot of shipwrecks on the way, isn't there? I mean, you two have been successful doing it, but many companies try down that path and just don't have the the financial resources to be able to sustain their business for long enough, or haven't been able to navigate the issues.
It's definitely front-loaded in terms of getting in, because there is a lot of data and evidence that you need to get past that initial hurdle. but then you kind of reap the benefits of that for quite
For a
some
while
time.
to come.
Yeah, to come. Yeah, and the good thing about the US is also they speak English and only English, so you don't need many different languages. Whereas the minute you enter the European market, then all of a sudden you have
it's fragmented.
28 languages that you
Yeah.
need to translate to. So there is other obstacles than just the regulatory that you have to overcome. It's fun and games.
I think the other thing about the US, and it's the good thing about it is it's nice to have one thing that you're chasing, that you're fully committed to and you're all in on.
Yeah.
And so if you go to the US, you've got to be all in on it. Whereas if you say you're going to other parts of the world, you end up hedging.
Yeah.
And you end up being, I'll do a bit of this,
Half
a bit of
in,
that,
half
and you
out.
dabble, it's
Yeah.
a little bit half-assed. So, if you actually have one target that's big enough to succeed in, I think it just makes you more focused and more likely to be successful.
Very good.
100%.
Look, we're pretty much out of time, so I had a few more questions. Very quickly though, are you optimistic for the success of the medical device sector for New Zealand? Are we on the right track?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a huge opportunity. Yeah,
Fantastic.
yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for coming in.
Thank
you
you.
for offering to demonstrate that, but I'm not going to take you up on that offer. Wonderful to be hearing more from amazing leaders, technology leaders. We'll be back after about a 10-minute break with some more. See you shortly. Ka pai.